Welcome to the 1,000 Nights and 1 Night. Now, when it was the 562nd night, she said, "It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that Sindbad the seaman continued. When I landed and found myself among the Indians and Abyssinians and had taken some rest, they consulted among themselves and said one to the other, 'There is no help for it, but we carry him with us and present him to our king, that he may acquaint him with his adventures.' So they took me together with the raft boat and its lading of moneys and merchandise, jewels, minerals, and golden gear, and brought me to their king, who was the king Sarandib, telling him what had happened. Whereupon he saluted me and bade me welcome. Then he questioned me of my condition and adventures through the man who had spoken Arabic, and I repeated to him my story from beginning to end, whereat he marveled exceedingly and gave me joy of my deliverance. After which I rose, and I fetched from the raft great store of precious ores and jewels and ambergris and lean aloes, and presented them to the king, who accepted them and entreated me with utmost honor, appointing me a lodging in his own palace. So I consorted with the chief of the islander, and they paid me the utmost respect. And I quitted not the royal palace. Now the island Sarandib lieth under the equinoctial line, its night and day both numbering 12 hours. It measureth 80 lengths long by a breadth of 30, and its width is bounded by a lofty mountain and a deep valley. The mountain is conspicuous from a distance of 3 days, and it containeth many kinds of rubies and other minerals, and spice trees of all sorts. The surface is covered with emery, with gems that are cut and fashioned. Diamonds are in its rivers, and pearls are in its valleys. I ascended that mountain, and solaced myself with a view of its marvels, which are indescribable. And afterwards I returned to the king. Thereupon all the travelers and merchants who came to the place questioned me of the affairs of my native land, and of the Caliph Harun al-Rashid and his rule. And I told them of what was there, and he was renowned, and I told them of this and that and wherefore, and because of this, whilst I in turn questioned them of the manners and customs of their own countries, and got the knowledge I desired. One day the king himself asked me of the fashions and form of government and of my country, and I acquainted him with the circumstance of the caliph's sway in the city of Baghdad, and the justice of his rule. The king marveled at my account of his appointments, and said, "By Allah, the caliph's ordinances are indeed wise, and his fashions of praiseworthy guise, and thou hast made me love him by what thou tellest me. Wherefore I have a mind to make him a present, and send it by thee." Quoth I, "Hearkening and obedience, O my lord, I will bear thy gift to him, and inform him that thou art his sincere lover and true friend." Then I abode with the king in great honor and regard and consideration for a long while, till one day, as I sat in his palace, I heard news of a company of merchants that were fitting out a ship for Basra, and said to myself, "I cannot do better than voyage with these men." So I rose without stay or delay, and kissed the king's hand, and acquainted him with my longing to set out with the merchants, for that I pined after my people and my own land. Quoth he, "Thou art thine own master. Yet, if it be thy will to abide with us, on our head and eyes be it, for thou gladdenest us with thy company." "By Allah, O my lord," answered I, "thou hast indeed overwhelmed me with thy favors and well-doings, but I weary for the sight of my friends and family and native country." When he heard this, he summoned the merchants in question, and commended me in their care, paying my freight and passage money. Then he bestowed on me great riches from his treasuries, and charged me with a magnificent present for the caliph. Moreover, he gave me a sealed letter that said, "Carry this with thine own hands to the commander of the faithful, and give him many salutations from us." "Hearing and obedience," I replied. The missive was written on the skin of kawa, which is finer than lamb parchment, and of a yellow color, with ink of ultramarine, and the contents were as follows: "Peace be with thee from the king of Al-Hind, before whom 1,000 elephants, and upon whose palace crenels are 1,000 jewels. But after, laud to the Lord, and praises to his prophet. We send thee a trifling gift, which be thou pleased to accept. Thou art to us a brother and a sincere friend, and great is the love we bear for thee in heart. Favor us therefore with a reply. The gift besetteth not thy dignity, but we beg of thee, O our brother, graciously to accept it. In peace be with thee. And the present was a cup of ruby, a span high, the inside which was adorned with precious pearls, and a bed covered with the skin of the serpent which swalloweth the elephant, which skin hath spots, each like a dinar, who sitteth upon it never sickeneth, and 100,000 miskals of Indian lin aloes, and a slave girl with a shining moon. Then I took leave of him and all my intimates and acquaintances in the island, and embarked with the merchants aforesaid. We sailed with a fair wind, committing ourselves to the care of Allah, be he extolled and exalted, and by his permission arrived at Basra, where I passed a few days and nights equipping myself and packing up my bales. Then I went to Baghdad city, the house of peace, where I sought an audience of the caliph and laid the king's present before him. He asked me whence they came, and I said, By Allah, O commander of the faithful, I know not the name of the city, nor where thither. He then asked, O Sinbad, is this true which the king writeth? And I answered, after kissing the ground, O my lord, I saw in his kingdom much more than he hath written in this letter. For state's procession a throne is set up for him upon a huge elephant, 11 cubits high, and upon this he sitteth, having his great lords and officers and guests standing in 2 ranks on his right hand and his left hand. At his head is a man hending in hand a golden javelin, and behind him another with a great mace of gold, whose head is an emerald, and a span long and as thick as a man's thumb. And when he mounteth horse, there mount with him 1,000 horsemen clad in gold brocade and silk. And as the king proceedeth, a man precedeth him, crying, This is the king of great dignity, of high authority. And he continueth to repeat his praises in words I remember not, saying at the end of the panegyric, This is the king owning the crown, whose like nor Solomon nor like the Mizrah ever possessed. Then he is silent, and one behind him proclaimeth, saying, He will die. Again I say, He will die. And the other addeth, Extolled be the perfection of the living who dieth not. Moreover, by reason of his justice and ordinance and intelligence, there is no qazi in his city, and all lieges distinguish between truth and falsehood. Quoth the caliph, How great is this king! His letter hath shown me this, and as for the mightiness of his dominion, thou hast told us what thou hast eyewitnessed. By Allah, he hath been endowed with wisdom as with wide rule. Then I related to the commander of the faithful all that had befallen me in my last voyage, at which he wondered exceedingly, and bade his historians record my story and store it up in his treasury for the edification of all who might see it. Then he conferred on me exceeding great favors, and I repaired to my quarter and entered my home, where I warehoused all my goods and possessions. Presently, my friends came to me. I distributed presents among my friends and family, and gave alms in largesse, after which I yielded myself to much joyance and enjoyment, mirth and merrymaking, and forgot all that I had suffered. Such then, O my brothers, is the history of what befell me in my 6th voyage, and tomorrow, Inshallah, I will tell you the story of my 7th and last voyage, which is still more wondrous and marvelous than that of any of the other 6, saith he who telleth the tale. Then he gave the porter 100 dinars as of wont, and they all went their ways, marveling beyond measure at that which he had heard. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased to say her permitted say. Now, when it was the 563rd night, she said, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that when Sindbad the seaman had related the history of what befell him in his 6th voyage, and all the company had dispersed, Sindbad the landsman went home, and slept as of wont. Next day he rose, and prayed the dawn prayer, and repaired to his namesake's house, where, after the company was all assembled, the host began to relate the 7th voyage of Sindbad the seaman. Know, O company, that after my return from my 6th voyage, which brought me much abundant profit, I resumed my former life in all possible joyance and enjoyment, and mirth and merry-making day and night, and I tarried some time in this solace and satisfaction, till my soul began once more to long to sail the seas, and see foreign countries, in company with merchants, and hear new things. So, having made up my mind, I packed up all bales and quantity and quality of precious stuffs suited for sea trade, and repaired with them from Baghdad city to Basra town, where I found a ship ready for sea, and in her company a considerable amount of merchants. I shipped with them and became friends. We set forth on our venture in health and safety, and sailed with a fair wind till we came to a city called Madinat al-Sin. But after we had left it, as we fared all in cheer and confidence, devising of traffic and travel, behold, there sprang up a violent headwind, and a tempest of rain fell on us and drenched us and our goods. So we covered the bales with our cloaks and garments and duggets and canvas, lest they be spoiled by the rain, and betook ourselves to prayer and supplication to Almighty Allah, and humbled ourselves before him for the deliverance from the peril that was upon us. But the captain arose, and tightening his girdle, tucked up his skirts, and after taking refuge with Allah from Satan the stoned, clomb to the masthead, whence he looked out right and left, gazing at the passengers and crew, fell to buffeting his face and plucking at his beard. So we cried to him, "O Ross, what is the matter?" And he replied, "Seek ye deliverance of the Most High from the strait into which we have fallen, and bemoan yourself and take leave of one another, for know that the wind hath gotten the mastery of us, and hath driven us into the utmost of the seas of the world." Then he came down from the masthead, and opening his sea chest, pulled out a bag of blue cotton, from which he took a powder like ashes. This he set in a saucer, wetted with a little water, and after waiting a short time, smelt and tasted it. And then he took out of the chest a booklet, wherein he read a while, and said, weeping, "Know, O ye passengers, that in this book is a marvellous matter, denoting that whoso come hither shall surely die without hope of escape. For that this sea is called the Sea of the Clime of the King, wherein is the sepulchre of our Lord Solomon, son of David. Oh, both be peace. And therein are serpents of vast bulk and fearsome aspect, and what ship soever cometh to these climes, there riseth to her a great fish out of the sea, and swalloweth up her and everything that's on board her." Hearing these words from the captain, great was our wonder. But hardly had he made an end of speaking, when the ship was lifted out of the water and let fall again, and we applied to praying the death prayer and committing our souls to Allah. Presently we heard a terrible, great cry like the loud, pealing thunder, whereat we were terror-struck and became as dead men, giving ourselves up for lost. Then, behold, there came up to us a huge fish, as big as a tall mountain, at whose sight we became wild for affright, and weeping sore, made ready for death, marveling at its vast size and gruesome semblance, when lo, a second fish made its appearance, which we had seen not more monstrous. So we bemoaned ourselves for our lives, and farewelled one another. But suddenly up came a third fish, bigger than the two first, whereupon we lost the power of thought and reason, and were stupefied for the excess of our fear and horror. Then the 3 fish began circling round about the ship, and the third and the biggest opened his mouth to swallow it, and we looked into his mouth, and behold, it was wider than the gate of a city, and its throat, it was like a long valley. So we besought the Almighty, and called for the succor upon his apostle, on whom be blessings and peace, when suddenly a violent squall of wind arose, and smote the ship, which rose out of the water, and settled upon a great reef, the haunt of sea monsters, where it broke up and fell asunder into planks, and all and everybody on board were plunged into the sea. As for me, I tore off all my clothes but my gown, and swam a little way, till I happened upon one of the ship's planks, whereto I clung and bestrode it like a horse, whilst the winds and the waters sported with me, and the waves carried me up and cast me down. And I was in a most piteous plight for fear and distress and hunger and thirst. Then I reproached myself for what I had done, and my soul was weary after a life of ease and comfort. And I said to myself, O Sinbad, O seaman, thou repentest not, and yet thou art ever suffering hardships and travails. Yet wilt thou not renounce sea travel, and thou say, I renounce, thou liest in thy renouncement? Endure then with patience, and with which thou sufferest, for verily thou deservest all that betideth thee. Then Scheherazade perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased saying her permitted say. Now, when it was the 564th night, she said, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that Sindbad the seaman continued. But when I had bestridden the planks, quoth I to myself, Thou deservest all that betideth thee. All this is decreed to me of Allah, whose name be exalted, to turn me from my greed of gain, whence ariseth all that I endure, for I have wealth galore. Then I returned to my senses, and I said, In very sooth, this time I repent to the Most High with a sincere repentance of my lust for gain and venture, and never will I again name travel with tongue, nor in thought. And I cease not to humble myself before Almighty Allah, and weep and bewail myself, recalling my former state of solace and satisfaction, and mirth and merriment and joyance. And thus I abode 2 days, at the end of which time I came to a great island, abounding in trees and streams. Then I landed, and ate of the fruits of the island, and drank of the waters, till I was refreshed, and my life returned to me, and my strength and spirits were restored. And I recited, Oft, when thy case shows knotty and tangled skein, fate downs from heaven and straightens every ply. In patience, keep thy soul till clear thy lot, for he who ties the knot can eke untie. Then I walked about, till I found on the further side a great river of sweet water, running with a strong current, whereupon I called to mind the boat raft I had made aforetime, and said to myself, Needs must I make another. Haply I may free me from this strait. If I escape, I have my desire, and I vow to Allah Almighty to forswear travel. And if I perish, I shall be at peace, and shall rest from toil and moil. So I rose up, and I gathered together great stores of pieces of wood from the trees, which were all of the finest Sanders woods, whose like is not, albeit I knew it not, and made shift to twist creepers and tree twigs into a kind of rope, which with I bound the billets together, and so contrived a raft. Then saying, An I be saved, 'tis of God's grace, I embarked thereon, and committed myself to the current, and it bore me on for the first day, and the second, and the third, after leaving the island, whilst I lay in the raft, eating naught, and drinking when I was athirst of the water of the river, till I was weak and giddy as a chicken for stress of fatigue and famine and fear. At the end of this time I came to a high mountain, whereupon ran the river, which then I saw. I feared for my life by reason of the straitness I had suffered in my former journey, and I would fain have stayed the raft and landed on the mountainside, but the current overpowered me and drew it into the subterranean passage like an archway, whereupon I gave myself up for lost and said, There is no majesty and there is no might save in Allah the glorious and the great. However, after a while the raft glided into open air, and I saw before me a wide valley, whereinto the river fell with a noise like the rolling of thunder, and a swiftness as the rushing of the wind. I held on to the raft for fear of falling off, whilst the waves tossed me right and left, and the craft continued to descend with the current, that I could not stop or no turn it shorewards, till I stopped at me at a great and goodly city, grandly edified, and containing much people. And when the townsfolk saw me on the raft dropping down the current, they threw me out ropes, which I had not strength enough to hold. Then they tossed a net over the craft, and drew it ashore with me, whereupon I fell to the ground amidst them, as I were a dead man, for stress of fear and hunger and lack of sleep. After a while, there came up to me out of the crowd an old man of reverend aspect, well stricken in years, who welcomed me and threw over me abundance of handsome clothes, wherewith I covered my nakedness. Then he carried me to the Hammam bath and brought me cordial sherbets and delicious perfumes. Moreover, when I came out, he bore me to his house, where his people made much of me, and seating me in a pleasant place, set rich food before me, whereof I ate my fill, and returned thanks to the gods the Most High for my deliverance. Thereupon his pages fetched me hot water, and I washed my hands, and his handmaids brought me silken napkins with which I dried them and dried my mouth. Also the sheikh set apart for me an apartment in a part of his house, and charged his pages and slave girls to wait upon me and do my will and supply my wants. They were assiduous in my service, and I abode with them in the guest chamber 3 days, taking my ease of good eating and good drinking and good sense, till my life returned to me, and my terror subsided, and my heart was calmed, and my mind was eased. On the 4th day, the sheikh, my host, came in to me and said, Thou cheerest us with thy company, O my son, and praise be to Allah for thy safety. Say, wilt thou now come down with me to the beach and the bazaar, and sell thy goods and take thy price? Belike thou mayst buy thee wherewithal to traffic. I have ordered my servants to remove thy stock and trade from the sea, and they have piled it on the shore. I was silent a while, and I said to myself, What mean these words, and what goods have I? Then said he, O my son, be not troubled, nor careful, but come with me to the market, and if any offer for thy goods what price contenteth thee, take it. But, an thou be not satisfied, I will lay them up for thee in my warehouse, against a fitting occasion for sale. So I bethought to myself, do his bidding and see what are these goods. And I said to him, O mine uncle the sheikh, I hear and I obey. I may not gainsay thee an aught, for Allah's blessing is on all thou doest. Accordingly, he guided me to the market street, where I found that he had taken in pieces of the raft, which carried me, and which was of sandalwood, and I heard the broker crying it for sale. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased saying her permitted say. Now, when it was the 565th night, she said, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that Sindbad the seaman thus resumed his tale. I found that the sheikh had taken to pieces my raft which lay on the beach, and the broker was crying the sandalwood for sale. Then the merchants came and opened the gate of bidding for the wood, and bid against one another till its price reached 1,000 dinars. When they left bidding, and my host said to me, Here, O my son, this is the current price of thy goods in hard times like these. Wilt thou sell them for this, or shall I lay them up in my storehouses till such a price, and let it rise? O my lord, answered I, the business is in thy hands. Do as thou wilt. Then asked he, Wilt thou sell the wood to me, O my son, for 100 gold pieces, over and above what the merchants have bidden for it? And I answered, Yes, I have sold it to thee for monies received. So he bade his servants transport the wood to his storehouse, and carrying me back to his house, seated me, and counted out to me the purchase money, after which he laid it in bags, and setting them in a privy place, locked them up with an iron padlock, and gave unto me the key. Some days after this the sheikh said to me, O my son, I have somewhat to propose to thee, wherein I trust thou wilt do my bidding. Quoth I, What is it? Quoth he, I am a very old man, and have no son, but I have a daughter who is younger in years and fair of favor, and endowed with abounding wealth and beauty. Now I have a mind to marry her to thee, that thou mayest abide with her in this our country, and I will make thee master of all that I have in hand, for I am an old man, and thou shalt stand in my stead. I was silent for shame, and I made him no answer, whereupon he continued, Do my desire in this, O my son, for I wish but thy will, and if thou wilt but do as I say, thou shalt have her at once, and be as my son, and all that is under my hand or that cometh to me shall be thine. If thou have a mind to traffic and travel to thy native land, none shall hinder thee, and thy property will be at thy sole disposal. So do as thou wilt. By Allah, O my uncle, replied I, thou art become to me even as my father, and I am a stranger and have undergone many hardships, while for stress of that which I have sought not of judgment or knowledge is left to me. It is for thee, therefore, to decide what I shall do. Hereupon he sent his servants for the Kazi and the witnesses, and married me to his daughter, making for us a noble marriage feast and high festival. When I went into her, I found her perfect in beauty and loveliness, and symmetry and grace, clad in rich raiment, and covered with a profusion of ornaments and necklaces and other trinkets of gold and silver and precious stones, worth a mint of money, a price none could pay. She pleased me, and we loved each other, and I abode with her in all solace and delight of life, till her father was taken to the mercy of Allah Almighty. So we shrouded him and buried him, and I laid hands on the whole of his property, and all his servants and slaves became mine. Moreover, the merchants installed me in his office, for he was their sheikh and their chief, and none of them purchased aught but with his knowledge and by his leave. And now his rank passed on to me. When I became acquainted with the townfolk, I found that at the beginning of each month they were transformed, and that their faces changed, and they became like unto birds, and they put forth wings wherewith they flew upon the upper regions of the firmament, and none remained in the city save the women and children. And I said in my mind, when the first of the month cometh, I will ask one of them to carry me with them whither they go. So when the time come, and their complexion change, and their forms alter, I went into one of the townsfolk, and said to him, Allah upon thee, carry me with you, that I might divert myself with the rest, and return with you. This may not be, answered he, but I ceased not to solicit him, and I importuned him till he consented. Then I went out in his company without telling any of my family or servants or friends, and he took me on his back, and flew up with me so high in the air, that I heard the angels glorifying God in the heavenly dome, where I wondered, and I exclaimed, Praise be Allah, extolled by the perfection of Allah. Hardly had I made an end of pronouncing the tasbih, praise be Allah, when there came out of heaven a fire that all but consumed the company, whereupon they fled from it, and descended with curses upon me, and casting me down on a high mountain, went away, exceedingly wroth with me, and left me there alone. As I found myself in this plight, I repented of what I had done, and I reproached myself for having undertaken that which I was unable, saying, There is no majesty, and there is no might save in Allah, the glorious, the great. No sooner am I delivered from one affliction than I fall into a worse one. And I continued in this case, knowing not whither I should go, when lo, there came up 2 young men as they were moons, each using a staff of gold, of red gold. So I approached them, and saluted them, and when they returned my salam, I said to them, Allah upon you twain, who are ye, and what are ye? Quoth they, We are the servants of the Most High Allah, abiding in this mountain, and giving me a rod of red gold they had with them, went their way, and left me there. I walked on about the mountain ridge, staying my steps with the staff, and pondering the case of these 2 youths, when, behold, a serpent came forth from under the mountain, with a man at her jaws, whom she had swallowed even to below his navel, and he was crying out and saying, Whoso delivereth me, Allah will deliver him from all adversity. So I went up to the serpent, and smote her on the head with the golden staff, whereupon she cast the man forth out of her mouth. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased to say her permitted say. And so do I cease my telling of these tales for the day, till it be morrow.